In part 1, we uncovered the chilling stories of children who took lives before they even understood the value of one. But now we dive even deeper. From a 10-year-old girl who strangled toddlers with her bare hands, to a teenage genius who used chemistry as a weapon, and finally, to the man known as La Bestia, who may have taken more than 300 lives starting as a teenager. These are not cautionary tales. These are real stories. Welcome to part 2 of our countdown on the youngest serial offenders in the world. Before we dive into these chilling real-life stories, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because here, we uncover the stories that many would rather forget, but the world needs to hear. Number 5. Mary Bell, United Kingdom. What happens when a killer isn't a hardened criminal but a 10-year-old girl? In 1968, the city of Newcastle, England, was rocked by a series of shocking deaths. 2 little boys were found dead, strangled, abandoned, and the person behind it wasn't who anyone expected. She wasn't a man with a history of violence. She wasn't even a teenager. She was Mary Bell, and she was just 10 years old. This is the story of one of the youngest and most chilling murderers in British history. Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957, in Newcastle upon Tyne. From the outside, she looked like any ordinary girl, bright eyes, sharp features, and a quiet demeanor. But behind closed doors, Mary's life was anything but ordinary. Her mother, Betty Bell, was a sex worker who was often absent and deeply unstable. There were reports that Betty tried to kill Mary multiple times when she was an infant, once attempting to give her away to a stranger. It's said Mary was often drugged with sleeping pills and left alone. Family members and neighbors suspected abuse, but nothing was ever done. Her father figure, Billy Bell, though not her biological father, was a criminal who was in and out of jail. Mary grew up surrounded by chaos, and it didn't take long for the darkness she had seen to take root in her own mind. By the time she was in primary school, Mary had already developed disturbing behaviors. She was known to be aggressive, manipulative, and emotionally detached. Teachers described her as intelligent but disruptive. Other kids were scared of her. No one knew it yet, but she was about to take things much further. On May 25, 1968, just one day before Mary's 11th birthday, 4-year-old Martin Brown was found dead inside an abandoned house in Scotswood. He had been strangled, but there were no obvious signs of violence. At first, authorities thought he had accidentally ingested something or suffered an accident. There was no immediate suspicion of murder. But the neighborhood children, especially Mary and her friend, Norma, were acting strangely. They had been seen lurking near the scene of Martin's death. One day, Mary even tried to break into a nursery school and left behind a disturbing message. Crude notes written in childish handwriting that said things like, "I murder so that I may come back. We did murder Martin Brown." Still, no one could imagine that a child was behind it. It was easier to think it was a sick prank. In July 31, 1968, just 2 months after Martin's death, 3-year-old Brian Howe went missing. Hours later, his body was found in a grassy area behind a row of houses. Like Martin, he had been strangled. But this time, there were injuries. His genitals had been partially mutilated with a pair of scissors, and the letter M had been scratched into his stomach with a razor or broken glass. This wasn't random. This was calculated. The police immediately realized this wasn't a tragic accident. It was murder. During interviews, Mary Bell seemed overly curious about the case, asking detectives questions and inserting herself into the investigation. At one point, she even took police to the crime scene and pointed out where Brian's body was found, pretending to be helpful. But what really caught detectives' attention was something Mary said during questioning. She claimed she had seen a boy playing with scissors near the body. That was never released to the public. Only the killer would have known. Both Mary Bell and Norma Bell were arrested shortly after Brian's murder. Norma, 13 years old, was frightened and quickly broke down under pressure. But Mary? She remained disturbingly calm. When asked why she had killed Brian, Mary reportedly said, "I wanted to hurt him." The public was horrified. How could a child do something so cruel, so cold? During the trial, Mary's lack of remorse stood out. She sat in the courtroom emotionless, detached, and eerily composed. She even giggled at times. Psychiatrists described her as having classic symptoms of psychopathy. One expert testified that she showed signs of narcissism, aggression, and a complete lack of empathy. Norma was eventually acquitted, deemed to have been manipulated by Mary and too intellectually immature to understand her actions. Mary Bell, on the other hand, was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. She was just 11 years old. The judge declared her a dangerous child who posed a serious threat to others, and ordered that she be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, a form of indefinite incarceration. Mary was sent to a series of secure children's homes and later youth prisons. Over the years, she was moved between institutions, sometimes blending in, sometimes clashing with staff. But what remained consistent was the British public's fury. They believed someone who could kill so young, who could show no regret, should never be allowed back into society. In 1980, after serving 12 years, Mary Bell was released at the age of 23. She was granted a new identity and given complete anonymity to protect her from vigilantes and the press. It was a controversial decision, but the courts defended it as necessary for her safety. She eventually became a mother, and, in a twist that shocked many, her daughter had no idea of her past until journalists tracked them down years later. The media firestorm that followed was so intense that Mary and her daughter were relocated, and in 2003, they were granted lifetime anonymity by the British courts. To this day, her whereabouts are unknown. Mary Bell's story isn't just about the murders of two innocent boys. It's about what happens when a child is failed by family, by society, and by the systems meant to protect them. Was Mary Bell born evil? Or did the trauma of her early life twist her into something monstrous? More than 50 years later, that question still haunts criminologists, psychologists, and anyone who hears her story. She was only 10 years old, and she killed twice. This has been the chilling case of Mary Bell, the girl who took lives before she even reached adolescence. Number 4. Robert Thompson and John Venables, United Kingdom. On a cold February afternoon in 1993, in the heart of Liverpool, England, a 2-year-old boy was led away from his mother in a busy shopping center. What followed shocked the entire world. The child, James Bulger, was found dead 2 days later. But what stunned the public wasn't just the murder itself, it was who did it. Not a serial killer, not a deranged adult, but two boys. Two 10-year-old boys. This is the story of Robert Thompson and John Venables, and the brutal crime that changed Britain forever. It was February 12, 1993. Denise Bulger took her son, James, to the Strand shopping center in Bootle. Like any 2-year-old, James was curious, energetic, and full of life. While his mother turned to pay at a butcher's shop for just a moment, James wandered off. Security footage would later show the last living images of James, holding the hand of a slightly older boy, calmly walking away. Those two boys were John Venables and Robert Thompson, both only 10 years old. Initially, no one suspected foul play. Maybe he was lost. Maybe someone had found him. But as hours passed and no sign of James emerged, hope quickly faded. Then, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, James Bulger's body was discovered near a railway track in Walton, Liverpool. The horror was only beginning. What police uncovered was far worse than anyone could have imagined. James Bulger hadn't just been killed. He had been tortured. The injuries were so extensive that pathologists couldn't determine which blow had ultimately killed him. His skull had been shattered by bricks and an iron bar. Batteries were found in his mouth. His body had been left on the tracks in an attempt to make his death look like an accident. This was premeditated. It was sadistic. And it was done by children. Venables and Thompson had skipped school that day. They spent hours at the shopping mall, reportedly attempting to abduct a child. James wasn't their first target, he was just the one they managed to lure away. They led him on a 2-mile walk across Liverpool, stopping several times as James cried, resisted, and begged to go home. Some passersby saw the boys and even questioned them. But when asked, Venables and Thompson said James was their younger brother, or that he was lost and they were helping him. No one suspected two children of being capable of murder. Until it was too late. The murder had gripped the nation. Posters of James were everywhere. The grainy CCTV still of the two boys leading him away had been broadcast repeatedly. A woman recognized John Venables from the footage and contacted the police. Soon after, both Venables and Thompson were arrested. Under questioning, both boys initially denied everything. But slowly, under the pressure of evidence, guilt, and sheer fear, they began to confess. Venables broke first. He cried. He asked for his mom. He admitted they took James, that they hid him, that they left him there. Robert Thompson was more composed. He showed little emotion. One detective described him as chilling. He never cried, never broke down. As investigators pieced together the timeline, the full horror became clear. They had planned it. They had tried to kidnap other kids, and when they got James, they didn't stop. The trial began in November 1993 at Preston Crown Court. Venables and Thompson were just 11 by then, but were tried as adults. For the first time in British history, children were accused of murder in a public courtroom. Behind bulletproof glass, the two boys sat in oversized chairs, dwarfed by the courtroom. The world watched as prosecutors laid out the evidence. The CCTV footage, witness statements, and chilling confessions. The boys were accused of abduction, torture, and murder. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before delivering the verdict. Guilty. John Venables and Robert Thompson became the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. They were sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, an indefinite term in juvenile custody. Initially, the minimum term was set at 8 years. Public outrage was swift and loud. The tabloids called them monsters. Petitioners demanded life imprisonment. Even the Home Secretary later increased their sentence to 15 years, though that was eventually overruled by the House of Lords. In 2001, after serving 8 years, Venables and Thompson were released at the age of 18. They were given new names, new identities, and permanent anonymity for life. This decision was, and still is, highly controversial. The British government argued that, having served their sentence and been rehabilitated, they deserved a second chance. Critics believed they were still dangerous and that justice had not been served. The case didn't end there. In 2010, John Venables was arrested again for possessing images of child abuse. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. In 2017, he was caught a second time with similar material. He was jailed again. Each time, his new identity was protected by law. As of today, he remains a high-risk offender under constant monitoring. Robert Thompson, on the other hand, has remained out of the public eye. No known offenses. No leaks. Nothing. The case of James Bulger changed everything. It changed how the UK saw children and crime. It forced the nation to ask, what makes a child a killer? Nature? Nurture? Evil? Venables and Thompson weren't born monsters. But something went terribly wrong. The cruelty of what they did left scars that will never fade. James Bulger would have turned 34 this year. Instead, his name is remembered as the face of one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in British history. With the question, can a child who kills ever truly be rehabilitated? Number 3. Lionel Tate, United States. He was only 12 years old when it happened. A child who loved wrestling. A child who looked up to TV heroes, practiced moves in the living room, and dreamed of becoming strong. But one day in 1999, something went horribly wrong. By the time it was over, a 6-year-old girl was dead. And Lionel Tate was charged with murder. What really happened inside that Florida home? Was it a tragic accident or something far more disturbing? This is the story of Lionel Tate once, the youngest American sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tiffany Unick, just 6 years old, had been brought over to the Tate household in Broward County, Florida. She was there to play supervised by Lionel's mother, Kathleen Grossett Tate, a Florida Highway Patrol trooper. At some point that evening, Lionel's mother went upstairs, leaving the two children downstairs to play. Less than an hour later, she came down to find Tiffany unconscious, her small body battered and bruised. She was pronounced dead soon after. Lionel claimed he had only been play wrestling, with her imitating his favorite moves from World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. Body slams, elbow drops, the works. He insisted he didn't mean to hurt her. But the autopsy told a different story. The medical examiner's report was brutal. Tiffany had been beaten so badly that her liver was lacerated. She suffered a fractured skull, broken ribs, and a torn internal vein. The report described her injuries as similar to those found in a high-speed car crash. She had over 30 separate injuries. This wasn't just one wrong move. This was sustained violent trauma. Prosecutors argued that the sheer severity of the injuries ruled out any idea of an accident. It wasn't just wrestling. This was a brutal attack. But could a 12-year-old really have understood the consequences of what he was doing? That question would soon be put to the test in a courtroom. Lionel Tate was charged with first-degree murder, an adult charge. Under Florida law at the time, anyone charged with such a crime was automatically tried as an adult. In January 2001, after just 1 hour of jury deliberation, Lionel was convicted of first-degree murder. He was 14 years old and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The reaction was swift and polarizing. To some, justice had been served. A child had died a horrific death, and someone needed to be held accountable. To others, this was a travesty. How could a 12-year-old with a child's mind be sentenced to die in prison like a hardened criminal? The case sparked national and international outrage. Human rights groups called it cruel and unjust. Even professional wrestlers weighed in, arguing that kids can't fully understand the danger of imitating what they see on TV. After years of legal battles and growing public pressure, Lionel Tate's conviction was overturned in 2004. The court ruled that he had not received a proper mental competency evaluation. Before trial, something critical given his age and the circumstances. He was released from prison under strict probation. Instead of life behind bars, Lionel got a second chance. But freedom didn't bring redemption. Just 1 year later, in 2005, he was arrested again, this time for armed robbery. According to police, Lionel had entered a pizza deliverman's home wearing a mask, carrying a handgun. He was charged with violating his probation and committing a new felony. The judge was clear: Lionel had squandered his second chance. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, in 2007, another 10 years were added to his sentence after he pleaded guilty to possession of a weapon while behind bars. Many ask the same haunting question: how does a 12-year-old boy become the youngest person in modern U.S. history sentenced to life without parole, only to be given a second chance and then throw it all away? Some blame the system. Lionel grew up in a tough environment, his father absent, his mother often working long hours. There were signs of emotional trouble. He had been suspended multiple times from school. Others point to the influence of media. Lionel was obsessed with wrestling. His defense claimed he had no idea how much damage he could do by mimicking what he saw on TV. But deeper still, critics point to a broken juvenile justice system, one that punishes children like adults without addressing the root causes of their behavior. To this day, Lionel Tate's name is used in debates about juvenile sentencing. Should a child ever receive life in prison? What happens when kids kill but aren't truly aware of what death even means? Lionel Tate isn't just a name in a file. He's a symbol of a legal system wrestling with impossible questions. How do we punish youth crime? When does a child stop being a child in the eyes of the law? And what if they never really got a chance to grow up? Today, Lionel remains behind bars, with decades left to serve. Tiffany Unick, an innocent 6-year-old girl, is gone forever. A life lost in what may have started as play and ended in tragedy. This case will forever live in the history books, not just because of the crime, but because it forces us to ask, where is the line between childhood mistake and criminal intent? Number 2, Graham Young, United Kingdom. He was quiet, polite, intelligent. He didn't carry a weapon, he carried a vial. At just 14 years old, Graham Young began experimenting not in a lab, but at home. His tools weren't beakers and textbooks. They were poison bottles and teacups. By the time he was caught, people were dead, many more were sick, and he had fooled nearly everyone. This is the chilling story of Graham Young, the teenage killer who earned a sinister nickname, the Teacup Poisoner. Graham Frederick Young was born on September 7, 1947, in Neasden, a quiet suburb of northwest London. From a young age, he was different. While most kids read comics, Graham devoured books on chemistry, toxicology, and Nazi war crimes. He idolized infamous poisoners and fixated on historical figures like Adolf Hitler. At the age of 11, he was already conducting chemical experiments, learning how different substances affected the human body. But this wasn't just curiosity, it was obsession. And soon it would become deadly. By the time he was 13, Graham had already acquired antimony and thallium, two highly toxic substances. He began experimenting on his family. His stepmother, Molly, became his primary victim. Over several months, she experienced violent nausea, vomiting, and hair loss. Doctors were baffled. They thought it was a stomach flu or worse, early cancer. His father, Fred, and his sister too suffered odd symptoms, cramps, dizziness, fatigue. No one suspected Graham. But he wasn't just observing, he was enjoying it. In April 1962, things took a deadly turn. Maui Young died suddenly. The cause? Supposedly a heart attack. But Graham knew the truth. She had been slowly poisoned. And he had finally pushed her too far. He wasn't just fascinated with poisons, he was obsessed. He spoke openly about toxic substances and even discussed how they affected internal organs. He wrote disturbing essays about poisoning classmates. Eventually, a science teacher tipped off the school's psychologist, and the police were called. When they searched Graham's belongings, they discovered a shocking collection of poison bottles, lab notes, and journals detailing his experiments on family members. He didn't even try to hide it. In 1962, at just 14 years old, Graham Young was arrested and confessed. He was declared mentally ill and sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility. For most people, Broadmoor would have been the end of the road, but not for Graham. Over the next 9 years, he played the perfect patient. He charmed doctors, participated in therapy, and studied psychiatric textbooks. He convinced everyone he was rehabilitated. In 1971, at the age of 23, Graham was released. What the doctors didn't realize was that Graham hadn't been cured. He had been sharpening his methods. Now a free man, Graham moved to the town of Hemel Hempstead and got a job at a photographic supply company. It didn't take long before his coworkers started falling ill. Once again, the symptoms were eerily familiar: vomiting, disorientation, hair loss, and in some cases seizures. Within months, 2 coworkers were dead. Several others were seriously ill. The staff believed it was bad luck. Maybe it was the food, maybe some kind of virus. But then someone discovered a strange substance in the tea room, thallium. The police were called. Suspicion turned to Graham. When they searched his apartment, what they found shocked them again. A massive stash of poisons. Notebooks detailing doses, dates, victims, reactions. He had kept records of every single poisoning, dozens of pages long, cold, clinical, meticulous. Graham Young was arrested in 1971. This time there would be no hospital stay. He was going to prison. At trial, Graham appeared emotionless. He spoke about his victims as if they were part of a school experiment. Numbers, doses, symptoms. He showed no remorse, only interest. He was convicted of 2 counts of murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. The judge gave him life imprisonment, calling him dangerous beyond belief. In prison, Graham remained isolated. Inmates feared him. Staff watched him closely. He continued to study poisons, read books, and write. But in 1990, at the age of 42, Graham Young was found dead in his cell. The official cause? A heart attack. Some speculated that he had poisoned himself, a final secret dose of the substance he loved most. No foul play was ever confirmed. Graham Young wasn't driven by rage or revenge. He didn't kill out of desperation or fear. He killed because he was curious. Because he could. The teacup poisoner's legacy is a chilling reminder of what happens when intelligence is paired with obsession, when fascination turns into fatal experimentation. A teenage boy with a love for science became one of Britain's most notorious serial killers, all before he turned 25. He didn't need a knife or a gun. All it took was a cup of tea. Number 1. Luis Garavito, Colombia. Honorable mention for teen start. He walked with a limp, wore glasses, spoke softly. To most, Luis Garavito looked like an ordinary man, maybe a school teacher or a kind uncle. But behind that gentle exterior was one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Known as La Bestia, the beast, Luis Garavito confessed to the rape, torture, and murder of over 100 young boys across Colombia, and some say the real number could be even higher. This is the story of a monster hiding in plain sight. This is the horrifying case of Luis Garavito. Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubelos was born in 1957 in Genova, Colombia. From the beginning, his life was a nightmare. He grew up in extreme poverty, raised in a broken and violent household. He suffered physical abuse at the hands of his alcoholic father and later, sexual abuse by neighbors and others in his community. That trauma shaped his twisted worldview. As a teen, Garavito showed early signs of emotional instability. He became obsessed with power, control, and sexual domination fixations that would only grow darker over time. By the time he was in his late teens, he was already engaging in abusive behavior. But his true crimes wouldn't begin until years later when he would use his soft voice, disguise, and lies to lure in his victims. Throughout the 1990s, bodies of young boys began appearing across rural Colombia. Most were aged between 6 and 16 years old. Many were street children, orphans, or poor rural youth invisible in the eyes of the state. Their bodies showed signs of extreme torture, bondage, beatings, and in many cases, sexual assault. What was worse? Most were found decapitated or dismembered. Local police initially treated these cases as isolated incidents, gang violence, drug crimes, or the work of pedophiles. But the pattern was there, and no one was connecting the dots. Garavito moved constantly. He changed cities. He used fake names. And he changed his appearance, sometimes pretending to be a priest, a street vendor, or a charity worker. He would lure boys with promises of food, money, or work. Then he'd lead them into a remote area, fields, hills, railways, and unleash unimaginable horror. Colombia during the 1990s was drowning in violence. The drug wars, guerrilla conflicts, and political corruption dominated the news cycle. Amidst this chaos, no one realized a single man was killing hundreds of children right under their noses. Garavito exploited the system's blind spots. His victims were children no one looked for. Children without homes, without advocates, and for years he got away with it. In 1997, investigators finally got a break. Luis Garavito was arrested in 1999 not for murder but for the rape of a young boy who had escaped. Once in custody, authorities realized they had caught Colombia's most wanted man and possibly the most dangerous serial killer the country had ever seen. He confessed to 147. Later investigations tied him to over 300 disappearances. He provided detailed maps, drawings, and coordinates for burial sites. He remembered victims' names. He remembered what they were wearing. He remembered everything. He was cold, detached, methodical. At one point, he even corrected investigators when they got the timeline wrong. Luis Garavito was charged with 138 counts of murder, although it's believed the real number could be closer to 400. You'd think a man who committed such atrocities would be sentenced to death or multiple life sentences. But Colombia had no death penalty. And at the time, the maximum sentence for any crime, even serial murder, was just 40 years. Because he cooperated with authorities, Garavito received a sentence of just 22 years with the possibility of parole. Yes, you heard that right. A man who killed over 100 children could technically be released. Public outrage followed. Colombian lawmakers scrambled to update sentencing laws, but Garavito's case fell through the cracks. As of his last known status, Garavito remained in custody, but his potential release sparked fear and fury. In 2023, Colombian authorities reported he had died in prison, officially of cancer. Luis Garavito didn't just commit the worst crimes in Colombian history. He exposed a system that failed its children. He operated in the shadows of a broken country and used poverty, neglect, and corruption as his camouflage. He wasn't the kind of monster you see in movies. He was worse. He looked like your neighbor, spoke like a teacher, smiled like a friend. But behind the glasses, behind the voice, was La Bestia. Thank you for watching this heartbreaking story. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of true crime, subscribe to our channel for more chilling cases, criminal psychology, and global investigations that the world should never forget. Until next time, stay informed. Stay aware.